Here's another way I want to show you. What are referred to as undesigned coincidences. These are instances when you have one or more independent historical accounts, and they interlock in such a way that would be unexpected if the story were simply fabricated wholesale. So let me give you a specific example of this. In John's Gospel of his biography of Jesus' life, you have the story of the feeding of the 5,000. And he records, he says, lifting his eyes up, talking about Jesus, then, and seeing a large crowd was coming towards him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" Now, there's an interesting question at hand here. Why does Jesus ask Philip? Because Philip is actually a rather inconsequential character in this whole story. There are more likely candidates for Jesus to ask. He could have asked Matthew, who was a tax collector, who would have been used to financial transactions. He could have asked Judas, who was labeled as the in charge of the money bag. Why does he ask Philip? Well, what we can do is we can look at other instances where the feeding of the 5,000 is told. Specifically, Luke also tells the same story. He says, on their return, the apostles told him all that they had done, and he took them and withdrew apart to a town called Bethsaida. When the crowds learned it, they followed him and welcomed them and spoke to them of the kingdom of God and cured those who were in need of healing. Well, Luke doesn't mention individuals like Philip, but what he does tell us is he tells us the where. We have the who, and Luke tells us the where. So now we have the key actors in question, and we have the location. Well, it's interesting, if you go back to John, he mentions that Philip is actually from Bethsaida. So these came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida. So it begs the question, why did Jesus turn to Philip and ask where to buy bread? Well, Philip was a local. He would have known where to buy bread. So we put the pieces together. Because John and Luke tell the same story. Now, Luke doesn't mention Philip, but he does tell us the location. John, on the other hand, does mention Philip, but he doesn't mention the location. But he does tell us that Philip is from that location. So when Jesus asks, "Where shall we buy bread?" in the feeding of the 5,000, he does so because Philip is the likely candidate. But we only get those gaps filled because of undesigned coincidences. When we read the Gospels together, we find that they fill out these details, which are otherwise inconsequential, but when they tell similar stories, they actually start to confirm each other in very interesting ways. This is what scholars refer to as verisimilitude. That means the appearance of truth, likelihood, and probability. When we look at things like the frequency of names and the fact that we can trace them to a particular time period, or undesigned coincidences, we see that they have the appearance of truth, likelihood, and probability.